I ended up working with ENO on his records, music for airports and music for films. I said, why are you carrying your shoes? And he said, well, I just walked up here from 8th Street and my feet are hot. Is there someplace I could wash them?
Oh, gross. Ball's first wave punk rocker and recording engineer Ramona Jan stopped by the record store yesterday. We talked about kissing David Bowie, washing Brian Eno's feet, and recording Talking Heads, Ramones, and Sesame Street records. If you have questions for Ramona Jan, put them in the comments. Maybe she'll answer them. And if you dig this video, please click like and subscribe. It's a huge help to the channel, man. Ramona Jan, punk rock producer and engineer and punk rocker. What's up? Welcome to the Dennis Ball Show.
Hi, Dennis.
I got the book Hit Girls, which you recommended, which I'll put a link, ballers, in the description. It's a great book about women in punk rock, and you're in there.
Yes, I'm in there as the lead singer of Dizzy and Romelars, the producer of Nasty Facts. The Waitresses, Chris Butler, produced Dizzy and the Romelars EP.
And you were also in a band called Venus Flytrap.
Yes.
And you were Fly, and the other two women were Venus and Trap. Why were you Fly?
Why was I Fly?
Yeah.
Sort of was divvied up real quick. Susie Tyrell was obviously Venus. Nobody could argue with that. And
right.
Lisa Lowell. Both of them, by the way, are on tour with Springsteen now.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, isn't that great? And she claimed Trap. Thank God, because I didn't want to be Trap.
Right.
I was glad to be Fly, because in a way I am Fly.
Yeah. Was that your favorite band to be in?
All of them were favorites for different reasons. Venus Flytrap was a favorite of mine because I was singing with two of the best singers in New York City, without a doubt. And I learned a lot about singing from them. For Comateens, that was my first band, and I was very innocent in a lot of ways about being in a band. So those are some of my best memories because of the innocence surrounding being in a band. You just, let's just make a band and then play at CBGBs and make a record and sell it at Bleecker Bob's. You know, that's how we were just going through life.
The Comateens played a show at Hurrah, and then you came off stage and you went to the DJ booth with the record. What happened then?
You know, I had just gotten off stage and the DJ knew me and I wanted to bring him my single, and he was like, okay, this is really cool, I'll play it for sure. And he goes, David Bowie's here. And I'm like, you're really where? He said, right behind you. And I turned around and Bowie reached out and pulled me toward him. And I'm not kidding you, he just sort of bent me backwards, Gone with the Wind style, and kissed me passionately.
Gosh.
Well, I figured it was because, what a great performer I was, right? I just gotten off stage.
Right.
But then he started to talk about, was that a record of mine or whatever? Did I play in a band? And then I was really pissed off because, of course, I played in a band. I was just on stage. After that kiss, we broke up. Yeah, I didn't like the attitude. That was my whole Bowie thing.
That wasn't the only time that somebody got like handsy with you in the music business. I think that it's hard to probably be a woman at that time, right? There were no engineers that were women.
I was one of a handful in the world of female engineers. We had bullying and sexual harassment pretty much on a daily basis in the 70s. It wasn't easy. It was a stress. I look back on it now and I think, well, those things wouldn't be allowed anymore. But that was just the way it was.
In this climate, how did you get a job at a recording studio?
That was easy. I was actually recording there, and I realized I could probably get free recording time unlimited if I worked there. And the only job open at the time was the apprenticeship program, which started in the shipping department, and then one moved up and was trained as an engineer. I accepted that job. And the reason those jobs were open back then was because the owners of the studio and the people who ran the studio all came from high-profile, affluent families. And they all went to schools like Princeton and Harvard. They were like, oh my God, thank goodness somebody walked in and wants a job here, because we don't know how to reach out to anyone. I mean, these were people who never rode the subway.
All right, the two guys who own the studio were working on another project at the time that you started at the studio. So they were kind of busy. What were they doing?
That's John Roberts and Joel Rosenman. They financed Woodstock.
Right, so they were making sure Woodstock happened.
Yeah, they were partners with Michael Lang. Yeah, it was financed by John Roberts and Joel Rosenman. John Roberts was the heir to the Polydent fortune.
So while that was going on, Woodstock up there, do you remember what the first record you worked on was?
It might have been Lou Reed's Coney Island.
Really? Lou Reed?
Yeah. I was 19 and Godfrey Diamond was producing it. He was 21.
What was Lou Reed like?
He was dating Rachel at the time. Rachel was an early trans person, very tall. So she would come to the studio. And Lou was very to himself, scribbling on a pad, doodling all the time while he was in the studio. Wasn't particularly friendly, but that was okay. Not very many of the stars were friendly anyway, so it wasn't out of the ordinary. Lou was very much to himself. He didn't seem angry or happy, or there was no real emotion that I noticed. I didn't know much about him. I mean, I'm still friends with Godfrey, and Godfrey has since told me that he got the producing gig because he had been hanging out at the factory, Warhol's factory. And he was a young guy, but he looked older and he grew up in New York, so he was very sophisticated, a very good looking guy, like a Mick Jagger, blonde Mick Jagger. And his name was Godfrey Diamond. God Diamond. I mean, what else, you know?
Right.
And he had met Lou and convinced Lou to come into the studio and make that album.
Like, did you notice anything about how he worked when he was recording? Like, did he just know all the songs and he came in and just banged them out, or was he writing while he was recording them? Or do you remember any of that stuff?
Well,
that's a long time ago,
they rehearsed quite extensively before coming into the studio, which was typical back then because the studio was a lot of money. It was $250 an hour back in the 70s. And this would have been October, the fall of 1975. So I didn't get to see any kind of preparation or anything for the recording. And I wasn't part of the recording of the basic tracks, which are, the drums, the guitar, and all that stuff.
Right.
And they may have even done that at a different studio. It's more involved with the lead vocal part and the mixing. He came in later in another record that I worked on, which was Genya Raven's Urban Desire. She does a duet with him on that record. And the duet is called I, Colorado. Not Colorado the state, but Colorado, the color red. It's a great song. Lou was a very nervous lead singer in recording his lead vocals. So what would typically happen with somebody like that is we would say, okay, we're just going to run it down, but we're not going to record it. But that was a trick. And so usually that became the take, and that was the take in the case of I, Colorado.
Oh, really? So he was a nervous lead singer, so you would record his practice take, and then that would end up actually being the best one.
But we would record it without him knowing it.
And so he did that on his Coney Island record as well? You did that? You tricked him into...
Oh, sure. We did that with him.
Was he like drinking tea and stuff before he...
I don't remember. I don't remember any beverages around him, actually.
I'm just curious about, I'm a big Lou Reed fan and Velvet Underground fan.
I didn't know that.
I actually met Laurie Anderson once, and he was in the room, but I was afraid to go up to him and say hi.
For good reason.
Because I didn't want him to yell at me.
Exactly.
Speaking of Max's Kansas City, you met Brian Eno and Robert Fripp there the night before you recorded with them, right?
With Eno, not Fripp.
What record was that?
I think the first time I worked with Eno was Talking Heads.
Okay, was that more songs about buildings and food?
Yeah, that's it.
So you engineered that record?
Well, I was the assistant engineer on that record.
One of your colleagues said go up and say hi to Eno, and you were like... kind of nervous or something.
No, I wasn't nervous. It was my boyfriend at the time. I didn't know who Brian Eno was or Robert Fripp. And he said, why don't you go up and introduce yourself? That's Brian Eno. You're going to work with him tomorrow. And I was like, so? work with him. I'll meet him tomorrow. I look in retrospect, I look back and I'm like, yes, my boyfriend probably wanted to meet him, you know? I did go up to the table eventually after being pushed in that direction. And I said, okay, which one of you is Brian Eno? And they both looked at each other and rolled their eyes and then looked away from me. And I was like, okay, see ya. And that was it. I just left the table and I said, I didn't like the guy.
That was embarrassing, yeah.
The next day when he came in and I was setting up a session in front of a Neve console, he was like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. There are no women engineers. I didn't think it was, you were telling the truth and all this stuff. And yeah.
So he was apologetic.
Very apologetic. And I was very mad at him. And then I told him, well, I don't know who you are, but, I've worked with stars. I work with stars every day. People who are on number one on the chart. I'm like, I don't know who you are.
You were like, listen, Buster, I work with Barbara Streisand.
I don't know who the hell you are, but whoever you are, why are you carrying your shoes? He was carrying his shoes. He had bare feet when he walked into the studio.
And long flowing hair at that time, probably.
No, bald. I said, why are you carrying your shoes? And he said, well, I just walked up here from 8th Street and my feet are hot. Is there someplace I could wash them?
Oh, gross.
No, that's what I was just like, I love this guy. I was like, I love this guy.
I know. He's great.
But here's the funny thing about it. There was a bathroom in behind that studio. That was Studio A. But Keith Richards and John Phillips were in the night before. And they did a lot of shooting up. They shot up and there was blood all over the place.
Ugh.
So I knew I couldn't send him back there. So I had to call Joel Rosenman, who had an apartment in the building. And I had to say, can I send one of the clients up to wash his feet? These are not requests that they usually got.
So you're telling me Brian Eno walked a long distance to the studio, came in with his shoes in his hand and said, my feet are hot and gross, let me wash them. But because the bathroom was still drenched in John Phillips from the Mamas and the Papas and Keith Richards' blood from them shooting up the night before, you couldn't send him into that bathroom, so you send him upstairs to the neighbors.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yes, to the owner's bathroom, yeah.
Good Lord, what a work story that is.
Well, that was just every day. It was always, we were in the hub of the the rock scene of the world, really.
So were you recording David Byrne's vocals on that record?
Yes, we did record David Byrne's vocals.
What was that? What was he like? Was he difficult to work with?
No, he was very shy, very nice, quirky singer, but a very strong voice.
That record is absolutely incredible. Like, to me, that's one of their best albums. When that was being recorded, were you saying to yourself, this is leaps and bounds beyond what else is coming out right now? Did you think to yourself, this is an incredible record?
No, because you have to remember, I was a recording engineer by day, but I was in a band at night. So I knew what was going on and I had my own music. And so I didn't
You weren't impressed.
No, not impressed. I wouldn't say impressed.
You weren't impressed by the Talking Heads.
Actually, in the studio, nobody wanted really to work with them because they weren't really considered musicians. Then there were issues. There were issues with that. Well, we were a wrecking crew of New York City. They were people who could read music. They played in time. They made hit records every day.
Yeah.
Consummate musicians. The Ramones, whom I worked with also, and the Talking Heads were not consummate musicians. And I believe they would agree with that.
Right. Of course. They were not session musicians. They were a rock band.
Yeah, they were a garage rock band like my band was. So I didn't see them as anything special. I saw them as lucky. They were lucky, to get a deal. There was something about them on the scene that was a cut above. They were the cream of the scene. Let's put it that way. So for that reason, I understood, like with Psycho Killer, which was playing on the jukeboxes at the time.
Yeah.
You know, they were definitely stood out. And I think it was because they were funky. You know, they had that funk element, which made them danceable, and also what David Byrne sang about, and his voice. They just, you know, there was something about them. That's how it works. You know, there's a bunch of bands, and some of them rise to the top. But then there's a band like Suicide. Look at Suicide, for example. They were very different too.
They were.
But why didn't they rise to the top? And, you know, maybe they were too edgy. Psycho Killer, a song like Psycho Killer, wasn't edgy. Why? Because you got quirky David Byrne singing it.
Yeah, how it's put together, how it's perceived, perceptions.
Why not the Shirts, you know? Why didn't they become superstars?
Yeah, why didn't they? Why do you think they didn't?
Maybe the material wasn't strong enough. You know, you had to have people get behind you, because it's an immense struggle. It was an immense struggle to be in a band back then, to have an apartment in New York to survive.
You had to have the right series of events happen to be able to make it.
Yeah, and you could, like the band The Rousers, which was my boyfriend's band.
Yeah.
They were formed in 1977. They were still together up until the pandemic, when the drummer died, and still playing clubs in New York City. And the Times had just did an article on them. They were a terrific band with great material, and boy, could they perform. So what happened with them? You know, a series of events, a bad manager at one point.
Talking Heads, did you ever hang out with Tina and Chris? Did you ever meet those guys?
Oh, yeah, I worked with them a lot.
They seem like really nice people.
They are.
I actually just picked up Chris's book.
Oh, well, I'll add something, because I've always wanted to say this, and it's a delicate subject. I worked with Talking Heads when they did their first album, Tony Bongiovi and Lance Quinn. They hated Bongiovi. They couldn't stand him. Looking for...
that's John Bon Jovi's uncle, the
yes.
engineer, right?
Yes. He was the senior engineer at MediaSound. And, you know, I remember Tina coming to me and wanting to know, like, how to sort of, like, navigate with him. He didn't seem to listen to them or whatever. What they didn't understand was that back then, a guy like Tony Bongiovi, he's about making a hit record and doing whatever you have to do to make that record. It doesn't matter how the artist feels. But these new groups, Talking Heads and Ramones, they were more of a collaborative mind. So they would come into the studio thinking that's what was going to happen, and they'd be shocked. But they were also very, they were persistent in wanting to have that. And the more persistent they got, the more annoying it would be to somebody like Tony Bongiovi. So anyway, fast forward, they got ENO. That was a better match. But I have to say, having been there through both of those records, and also the transition from ENO working together without the Heads, I know that ENO was a big influence on David leaving the band. And because I know ENO, you puts a little thought in your mind. He did it to me, and I was happy about it. He encouraged me to leave MediaSound, which I did, and to devote myself to my music. I'm sure that he probably convinced David that he didn't need these guys. Right. David was the songwriter. He could have any musicians. Why not expand and do all kinds of things with seasoned musicians? So I would venture to guess that that was happening.
And the first record David Byrne made was Ray Momo, which is like 100% Latin music. And so completely, I mean, not completely, it followed Naked, so it wasn't a complete 180, but to go back to ENO, did you notice anything about his methodologies in the studio? Like, did he ever use oblique strategies or do anything weird when he was trying to direct the band's approach to the music?
Well, let me think about that for a minute. I ended up working with ENO on his records, Music for Airports and Music for Films. I would rather comment on that only because...
Please do. And
okay.
Those are two of the... how did you work on the very best records for everybody? Okay, those are two of his specialities.
Nobody wanted to work with the Ramones or the Talking Heads. Nobody in MediaSound. And I was very lucky that Ed Stasium was an outside engineer. I would get on his session somehow. Either he requested me or they just knew that we were a good team. The other engineers, they didn't want to work with non-musician types. And again, I was on both scenes, and I myself, I'm in the category of a self-taught musician, experimental type of Arto Lindsay type guitar player. ENO didn't give me credit for, I played on music for films.
You did? What did you play on that?
The Hammond B3 organ.
What?
Yeah, and he made me do it. We had an actual argument about it.
Oh my gosh.
I
didn't give you credit!
I refused him. And not too long ago, Ed Stasium and I were talking about that. Ed said, "Do you remember when you told ENO you were not going to play on his record?" No way.
Oh my gosh.
And he made you do it. ENO was, when he worked with the Heads, he was working with their material and adding his ideas. But when we worked on music for films and music for airports, that was all him. So I would say he was more free. He was the one person, he changed my life. He doesn't know this, but he did change my life because I felt he was a kindred spirit of mine. And that was, I didn't know it back then, but in retrospect, I'm an outsider artist, and so was he. His medium was sound. I became a visual artist and a puppeteer and very much outsider artist, storyteller. We were like very kindred spirits, and finally there was somebody who was coming into the studio who wasn't doing everything according to the book. When we started at Media, we all got like some kind of like manual, never read it. We were supposed to read it. I was more like ENO and just turn the dials until it sounded like you wanted it to sound, till it did the thing you wanted it to do. I was about no rules.
The Ramones. What albums of the Ramones did you work on?
Rocket to Russia.
Rocket to Russia was 77.
Right.
The self-titled first album was 76.
I might have worked on some of that, because that was with Bongiovi, yeah?
Yeah, I believe it was.
Yeah, I worked a lot with Tony Bongiovi. Everybody did, they had to. He was one of the training ground people. So whatever he was working on in 76, 75, 76, 77, 78, 79, I would be involved with that.
And Road to Ruin, probably.
Yeah, Rocket to Russia, Road to Ruin, yeah. And the live album, I know I worked on that.
Yeah, it's alive.
We moved around from project to project a lot. We were wherever we were needed. I mean, I recorded Sesame Street, for example. They had an orchestra and a live soundtrack. You might be working on the Ramones for a few days, and then the next thing you do is you're recording Sesame Street.
Sesame Street was probably cool.
Yeah, it was. Big Bird would come in and do his voices, and it was a big orchestra. Joe Raposo was the band leader.
Yeah, somebody come and play.
It was great. Sesame Street was one of the things that nobody wanted to really be on, but in retrospect, it was one of my favorite things.
Yeah, and it actually endures in people's hearts. On Rocket to Russia, there's a song called Ramona.
Mm-hmm, yep.
Is that about you?
I was told that was about me. I certainly was the only Ramona that was working with them. But as far as me wanting to go over, I never did. So it was, they used my name for sure and, made a song out of it, inspired.
That's fun.
Yeah, I guess I'm sweet, sweet little Ramona. I think that's how the song goes.
Yes, it does call you Little Ramona.
I am little.
Speaking of which, there was a picture of you with Joey Ramone, and you look like you're about half the size of him, and he was super tall.
He is super tall. He was super tall, like over 6 feet, and I'm 5 feet exactly. And that was at the New York Music Awards.
What was Joey like?
Joey was very shy. I worked with all of them, so I knew them all, and Tommy. Tommy was the most level-headed. Dee Dee was great. I mean, he was a personality, and I always felt great around him and liked him a lot. Johnny actually didn't like women in the studio. He was one of the, I don't know how to describe it, but...
A misogynist? So he actually, did he kick you out of the studio at one point?
He wouldn't allow me my name to be on the records, to get credit on the records.
What the heck, Johnny?
And I have to say that first of all, I didn't care about in fact, I didn't want my name on any of the records that I worked on because I wasn't forging a career as a recording engineer. I was learning the trade only so I could record myself.
But you deserved it, Ramona Jan. You deserved to be listed because you worked on the records.
Well, here's the thing. My name is now on the records. After how many years? 40 or something like that. Finally, with the reissues, they put my name on.
Ballers, if you dug that, check out this cool interview with David J. from Bauhaus. He also had a great David Bowie story. You have to hear it. All right.